Yeah, it's got to be if you got a fat carrot, you got to chop it into chips for scooping, right? If you got a thin carrot, you got to chop it into long pieces for dipping. You know what I mean? It's all about the hummus delivery mechanism.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I make probably a third of a gallon of hummus.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 471 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's May 31, 22 by 4. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show, so buckle up. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money every month to help keep this podcast going. We appreciate it. Now, we're recording this episode right on the heels of the previous one. It was 5 minutes ago that we recorded the previous one. So I'm going to be a little hoarse. And my voice is going to be weird.
I was gonna say,
you know?
He's a little hoarse today.
I'm no longer a man. I'm simply a small equestrian. Okay? Is an equestrian a person who rides the horse?
I think it's the person, I think.
Yeah, well
maybe
close
you are
enough.
An equestrian too. Who says the horse can't be an equestrian?
Yeah.
You know?
Who says? I don't see any laws. There's no laws that says a horse can't play basketball.
Yeah. Could a horse ride a horse? If so,
I don't see why not.
That's how horses are made, Sam.
how
do you think they got here? What we're going to do in today's episode is we're just going to answer some questions. Okay. We get questions from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. And we used up all of our conversation topics in the previous episode, so we got to outsource that shit. Okay. So let's get on it. Highest upvoted question for today's episode comes from Alewakka Cammya, who says, "Hey bros, did any of you try Palworld? What were your thoughts on the game, the explosion of its popularity, or the general atmosphere around it all?" Sam
did play it.
Did you?
I did,
Okay.
yes. My thoughts on it are that it is an amalgamation of designs sort of like just smooshed together very willy-nilly in a way that I found kind of surprising in the sense that it wholesale takes things from games and doesn't really reintegrate them a lot into its own design. Such
Could you
as,
tell me something about
Is it just it would be cool if the game...
not even that. It's sort of like it feels like the designers occasionally were like, "Oh, I played Elden Ring. They have this Evergoal thing in there where you walk in this area and then you're kind of in a parallel world and you fight a thing. Let's just do that. Use the exact same sort of like symbolism, almost just like
same icons, same fonts."
Yeah, and then they're like, Breath of the Wild is really cool. You know, they did those like musical trills and shit when you walk into new areas. Let's do that, and also use their font for like the headings and stuff when we do it here. And then they're like,
they just ripped stuff straight up.
I think that was actually, it was very surprising to me because of course it's its own game still, but like the extent to which it sort of just like is pieces of other games put together was a little shocking, to be honest. The thing
not in a way is inspired by it, but just is.
It just is. Yeah.
Both.
But I will say it's the same kind of game as something like, Ark or whatever else, which is actually pretty grind oriented, right? You're just going and harvesting stuff and doing that usual shtick. The Pokemon things are fun. I would say the overarching vibe I got from it was that like it sort of ends up feeling very much like a Skinner's box sort of a game. You know what I mean? Where it's like you're doing stuff just to do the stuff, and
you're doing the gameplay loop.
Yeah, you're doing the loop.
And
it's cool. And my favorite thing was actually the fact that it was basically how they handled the idea of you running around with a companion, like one of these Pokemon, because you can each one has a different power that you can activate at some point. And they do very different things. Probably my favorite one was I think one of them basically just turns into a flame. Like you just hold it and it just is a flamethrower now. Fucking awesome. Right. So it's like the fact that they did that sort of thing with it.
I like the idea
really cool.
that you can tell it to shoot flames, but you're not going to trust it to shoot flames at the right thing. So you got to grab it by the neck.
Yeah. It's sort of just
and aim it.
It was just hilarious. Like I loved that. That was the only new thing to me about the whole game, to be honest. Like the rest of it was this weird amalgamation. It works. For me, it worked for about 10, 11 hours or so. And then I was like,
that's actually better than I expected.
Fell off it real hard.
My sense of it, just from the promo materials and from how people were talking about it, was that it felt like a disposable kind of experience, where the idea is like, hey, we made a thing that is eye-catching in a whole bunch of ways because of the sheer absurdity, the fact that it steals from all of your favorite things, right? So basically it created like a cultural moment that from the outside I was like, this is going to last all of like a second, and then just like I forgot the game existed, completely forgot about it.
Oh, same. Actually,
brought it back. I think it's just gone.
It definitely did fall out, and I think it's the whole lasting power problem, which is like it is interesting on a conceptual level, but again, just the last episode we were talking about the higher level experience of the game and like trying to make something that it's the gestalt issue of do all the parts come together in a way where they punch much higher up than the kind of the original sum would be. And I think for me, that one like it doesn't quite do that. It's not quite hitting that sort of mark. It's interesting.
I pulled up the Steam chart right now just to see, and Palworld is not in the top 25 right now for concurrent players. So
that's a hard group to get into, though. So
it is, but they were at the top of it.
Yeah, they were
for a little while.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing. So it's like it's still going to have like a bajillion players. Like, it's not. I'm not saying it's like a bad game. You know what I mean? It's just that it's very.
Oh, for sure.
It's very gamey, I guess. So it kind of at some point you're like,
to me, it reminds me a lot of what happened with Pokemon Go, which was is it Niantic who made who made that? So they had a game called Ingress before Pokemon Go, which was basically the same as Pokemon Go, except it didn't have Pokemon in it. But structurally, the game was very similar. Like it was all about it was GPS oriented and about going out in the world and finding things and stuff. And it had a dedicated but very small player base. And then Pokemon Go shows up, and it's the same, but with Pokemon. And suddenly it is a worldwide phenomenon with billions of dollars a month coming in and all this stuff. And there are still a decent number of people who still play Pokemon Go, right? But it was a cultural phenomenon for 2 months, much like Palworld.
I think actually I think it actually had more staying power than that. Like it was big for what felt like a year or so.
That kind of lasted a while.
Yeah. Or rather, it was all anybody was talking about for a couple of months.
Yeah. And then it was like everybody was still playing it for like a year or two.
Yeah. But it just kind of shows that like Sam was saying, Palworld is Arc Plus. Yes. Right. It's built on a lot of the foundational things that Arc does. And they pulled in some other elements from some other games as well. But had they not had that Pokemon angle to it?
Well, it was Pokemon with guns. This was the advertisement, right? It was, which who
was
isn't
already
gonna at least go check it out?
Which is it's actually funny to me because it's like even just like Arc with Pokemon is an interesting enough concept, right? But the fact that they were like,
if it was Pokemon, like actually Arc with Pokemon, fucking cool.
Like, but then they're like Pokemon with guns though, and I was like, I mean, you didn't even have to go there, but I guess
I gotta at least take a look. But I think that just kind of goes to show that there were a lot of devs who were kind of salty about Palworld because of the things that you were describing, Sam. Of the audacity of them to just be like, you know what? We're just gonna take stuff, and I gotta respect it.
Oh, I totally. I don't have a. It's not an issue with the. It's not even taking because it's like again they didn't.
Well, you're just describing what they did. You're not like there's no judgment really.
I don't care because it's
this is just what it is.
Yeah, they do. They fit. They do end up. I mean, you of course have to integrate it into their own loops and stuff, and however they do the sheer like the closeness of things conceptually to where that came from is again surprising. I don't care, but I think the thing that is most interesting to me about it is the fact that they managed to make it all work, right? Despite the fact that they're just essentially like wholesale pulling stuff in and dropping it in and then like vaguely connecting it all together. The fact that it does work is shocking. That's kind of
impressive.
That's a jigsaw
and
puzzle.
That they knew enough to focus on the hook. Right?
Yeah, I think it's a great example of that. Yeah,
they could have spent 3 more years polishing a bunch of things up and trying to make it look like they hadn't just wholesale ripped stuff for other kids. But at the end of the day, nobody gave a shit.
What I vaguely remember from when it was popular was that the devs absolutely did not give a shit about.
Oh no, it was great. I also found that very amusing.
Their whole strategy was like, yeah, we're just stealing everything. We don't.
Yeah, and the players were like, cool, I like that stuff from that game, and now I like that it's over here too, right?
Yeah.
And like the only people who didn't like it were the people who it was stolen from. But
Yeah, there's that.
But you'd be hard pressed to say like, oh, like Breath of the Wild lost a bunch of sales because Palworld did well, right? Like they're so temporally spaced apart.
It's
and
not
shit
stolen in a way that it's not actually stolen. It's stolen in the art sense, which is like
it's copied.
it's copied. Yeah.
Breath of the Wild still has those great features.
Yeah,
it's not that Palworld took them away.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that just comes down to the fact that like, the thing has so many rough edges to it. And then the fact that those designs are kind of like in that strange, like roughly integrated state in there. I think it's the sort of thing that when you play through it, if you've made a bunch of games, or if you've been on teams and made a bunch of games and have had, frankly, like just slightly more design effort put into them, you're like, how is this making $1 bajillion? But I think, again, that's the point is,
well, I think that's
you're focusing on the wrong part because it's Pokemon.
Well, I think,
Duh.
yeah. Well, I think that's exactly it. I think to me, it's the voicing of frustration I think it's the same as like a content farm of any kind, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like you'll have people who are putting like so much effort, so much intelligence, so much skill into their own craft and then into creating things using that craft. And then they go out and they try to make a living doing that, right? With like so much care and effort.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the content farm concept, which you have in any kind of media type, where their strategy is completely different, which is just how much stuff can we make that looks exactly like the stuff that's currently popular, right?
Yep.
And that stuff it overwhelms because it's easier to produce on the one hand, right? But it also, because it has people who are making that kind of stuff do not give a shit about any ethical considerations whatsoever. So where other people might be like,
it's not about the craft at that point.
Yeah, it's not about the craft, but it's also not about other people's work. Because what's supposed to happen in any kind of industry space, right, is that there's sort of like standards either enforced legally or not.
There's
like,
a civility.
What is it?
Concept.
There's a civility. Yeah. What does it mean just to take a thing versus, cup? So, and whenever people just like bypass that entirely and are successful doing that, it rightly, justifiably feels unfair, right? Because you're like, I'm playing the game the way I'm supposed to, right? And it's so hard. And then this, like we see this with people like, it's like super wealthy people who just can break any laws they want to, and it doesn't. It's like the same vibe as all of that, right? Where I have my take on it is that it's a very justified sense of like, I'm mad that this was successful, right? Like I'm personally not mad, but I understand.
You're not. But it's weird because you're not mad at them for being successful. You're mad that you're working so hard to adhere to like your own.
No, it's actually
code,
it actually isn't that. To me it is like it's why people don't like cheaters, right? Which is the combo. It's both. It is like, well, if I could just cheat too, right? But like, I'm not mad that I'm not cheating.
I didn't think it is cheating.
Yeah, I think it is cheating. I think that's my problem with that. But the particular discourse around it is basically that to me, it's a very clear lesson, which is that we've talked about on the podcast a lot, which is that you can design the most incredible game experience that nobody wants to play because on a high level, the concept that you're putting out just does not resonate with anybody for any reason, right? Because you missed the first and frankly probably the hardest part of the design. It's not all of the bajillions of details, but just essentially choosing to make a thing that people will actually want to play at the end of the day, right? And I think that to me is the lesson from the Palworld thing, which is they were like, goddamn, Pokemon with guns would be so cool. What's the fastest way we could just make that? And it's like, just fucking grab that, put it together, boot that out the door. And it's like, again, to me, it's a lesson, which is the most important thing.
It can be two things. It can be a lesson. But yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That the most important thing is like, do players want whatever the idea is? And that matters more than anything else,
basically.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's true. But it can also be true that when people do it in that way. And like, it's just, they're like, well, people love Pokemon. We didn't make Pokemon, but other people did. People love it. And so we're going to make something that just is that so close that everybody's question is going to be, can they be sued for this?
Yes. Yeah.
Everybody's first question is exactly that. Like, and that's,
I feel that way about, there's a lot of games that come out and I'm like, this was risky. So I think No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk, right? Mm-hmm. Where like the developers made some decisions and then they shipped a product that in my mind, I'm like, I wouldn't have the risk tolerance to do that. Mm-hmm. Like I would feel like, for starters, like I'm violating some kind of social contract, but yep. In some cases, an actual one of like, I'm shipping a broken game, or another one, I'm shipping a game that just takes stuff. There's an ethics layer that I can't bring myself to violate. But on top of that, there's a risk management layer, which is, do we just ship this thing as is and just hope we don't get sued by everyone, right? Yeah. This is why I was saying, like, I got to respect the audacity to just be like, fuck it. And they just I can't do it, and I don't want to.
You can respect the audacity and also be like, I also get why people are,
oh yeah, for sure.
You can also,
makes sense.
But I wish I had that amount of confidence.
You can also disrespect the audacity, which is where I fall in.
Also,
for the same reason, like,
that's fine too.
People break the law constantly or do unethical things constantly in ways that give them enormous benefit, right? And sometimes, because like laws aren't ethics, so sometimes I can look at that and be like, oh, but
technically
for
legal,
taking the risk, right?
Right.
But it's just as possible to look at that and be like, well, we have these in place for a reason, because if everybody was doing things in this way, then all we have is bad stuff. All we have is clones of clones of clones of clones, blah, blah, blah. And that's all that can ever be successful if you're just allowed to do whatever, right?
But I think the thing is, like, it is the case that people can just do whatever, and we don't have, really have like that happening. Palworld's like a really weird, this is why it's weird to me. It's like, it's an exceptionally risky move. Not just on the legal side, whatever else.
Because we're talking about Nintendo. Like they're just like, we're just gonna step right on Nintendo's toes.
Yeah,
just as hard as possible.
I still can't believe that they never got sued.
It's shocking. It's shocking. But like the fact that the top charts aren't dominated by clones is the reality. It's typically either sequels, which maybe is a clone of itself. It's a child, I guess.
It's more of it's a child.
It's a child. So it's an offspring. There's a lot of sequels and stuff, but then most of the times what you see is really just like really fucking good new stuff showing up. And so I think it is hard. I put it this way: in combining the elements the way they did, there was clearly just a total focus on that high level concept and getting that to go, and not caring at all about what basically critics, like reviewers, right, or non-player entities, NPEs, if you
just
will,
anybody
would care, would say about it, right? It's just, I don't know, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
the game's not that good. I'm gonna be honest, the game's not that good. It's
I was just looking. So their peak player count was like 2.1 million, and it's currently 24,000. So like 90, they've lost 99% of their concurrent. Player
Which is
count.
A lot of
but they still have an insanely high player count, right? Like
22,000.
I would kill to have 20,000 concurrent players.
It's so good.
So but here's the thing. I agree with what Adam is saying. Where like, I mean, it does suck to be working hard to polish up everything and try to have everything that we do be like really well thought out and as original as possible and unique. And even though we're always borrowing ideas from other games because that's how things evolve, right? In the creative space. But we always try to put our own spin on it. And that always just takes time. It takes time and thought and energy and therefore money, right? Mm-hmm. And it does suck to see somebody just kind of waltz in and just blast and just make $1 billion. But
it's in a specific way though, right? Because it's in the same way that like,
in a way where they're not taking any of the precautions and care that we're taking.
Yeah, because I would argue that they're not taking a risk in a meaningful way. They're taking a legal risk against Nintendo.
That's what I'm saying. As far as the legal risk,
yeah, but they're not taking any other risk compared to what like somebody because like the risk that you do in game dev is investing fuckloads of money and time into a product that may or may not be successful, right? Yeah. What they did was invest as little as they could, and by basically just leveraging somebody else's IP, right?
Yeah, and then other people's designs.
and other people's designs, right? So their risk in terms of like what the normal risk was very low. The risk they gave themselves in exchange was to legal
Poke a bear
action by Nintendo, which I still can't believe didn't happen. It's bizarre to me because like people were showing side by sides of like various.
There's a whole thing for like months.
It was just so I was like, it would be such an easy lawsuit to win. It feels like it's just weird that never happened. But to me, it's like it's the same frustration I feel about like when I hear some billionaire being interviewed about something and they talk about how they got here and how anybody could do it. And I'm like, the way you did it was by grinding everybody else to death under your boot, right?
Yep.
That's how you do it. And if I was willing to do that, sure, I could go be a billionaire too, right?
You get that much by taking it.
Exactly. And, and to me, that's the part that I just like, I don't have any respect for the audacity of burning people, burning everything around you to
sure. I'm just talking about Palworld. It's not like
But to me, like it's But to me, like the Palworld thing is like it's not.
It has an echo. It has an echo of it, right? In the sense,
the damage isn't the same, definitely, right? Because also, I don't care if somebody infringes on Nintendo's IP rights. They're
absolutely not.
Bajillion dollar.
They'll be fine.
They're doing fine. It doesn't matter, right? In any meaningful way. So like, I don't care about that bit. It's about the idea that just like with doing stuff to become a billionaire, anybody can do that stuff. Anybody could go just be like, I'm going to go clone Pokemon and see if I can make that be a hit, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can do that. But like I don't because like of the
because you have a respect
for the craft, respect for the people who I'm selling things to. It's not right, and so
but I mean, I feel the same about like Diablo Immortal came out, and apparently to like max out your character, it costs something like $570,000. Okay,
nice, sick.
That's unethical as fuck.
Yeah,
right.
It's immoral. It's all the way.
And,
yeah.
And that game, everybody hated it, and it made a fuckload of money, right? And like we've always had the option to make games like that, and when we first started out, we were making free games with in-app purchases and stuff in them. That's what Quadrupus Rampage was.
I mean, not to that degree, but
Well, but the point, like Quadrupus Rampage had like you could only spend like up to like $20, and then there's like not really any reason to spend more in that game. And we even felt bad about that, right? But what we kind of found was after we launched that game, we're looking at the player counts, we're looking at the revenue numbers, and we're like, we gotta figure out how to get more money from these players, right? And we found ourselves designing game updates just for that purpose. It wasn't like what's more fun for players, what would be cool to add. It's we got to get more revenue so we can last longer as a studio, right? And once the conversation shifted to that and our game design focus shifted to that, we were like, I fucking hate this. Like it just feels like you're just trying to take stuff from people now, and you're not trying to give them something in return.
I think that's true. I do think there's also the reality though that on the dev side, because oftentimes when we talk about Crashlands, like Crashlands has millions of pirates. Okay. So the reality is like Butterscotch
tens of millions.
Our studio could fold at some point in the future because we don't have enough revenue, right? It's an expensive operation. It can happen. So that could easily happen. And so there's also that fact lurking in the background, which is this whole like, you got millions and millions of people, okay, who have played and enjoyed and loved the thing you made, who, won't ever give you there's no anything for it. There's no sustaining the operation, any kind of anything for it. There's so many of these things, whether it's Palworld, Pirates, whatever, that on the dev side, design side, I think if you start like getting real, I don't know, if you start getting real mad about it, like, man, you could just be mad forever. I don't know. There's so many things that are just kind of like floating around that are just there for the taking to focus on and just be kind of pissed off about. And
but I mean, at the end of the day, our thing is like we want to do things in a way that we're proud of, and that we feel like every decision we make is something that we feel like our players would understand and be supportive of. Right. Even to a point where like we got all these old games. We got like Roid Rage and Flop Rocket and stuff like that. Those games are on life support. Like we're still keeping them alive, but also like we're doing it because we try to do right by our players. But there's probably going to be a point where we just stop. We just stop updating those games because, hey, once they're like 15, 20 years old and they're making $8 a year, like why would we do that?
We lose money on them every year is the fact.
We lose money on them every year. We're
it's
keeping
the sort
them
of
going
thing that I would
because
prefer to jettison, because it's
but right now, like they're so low cost to maintain that it's still
kind of whatever.
It's not much. But there may be a point where that changes, and we feel like if we had to do something like that, our players would understand. But if we, for example, said, "Hey, we're changing Crashlands 2 to be a free to play game," and you got to buy crafting bucks, and every time you craft something, it costs you $1 or
also,
whatever.
you have to log in with a PlayStation Network account.
Yeah.
Just for fun.
In the countries,
but 6 months later, after we've launched the game, if we do stuff like that, where like no matter how you try to explain it to the players, they're smart and they'll understand that this is not to their benefit. And you're doing it to try to take something, right? And so at that point, we wouldn't be proud of what it is that we're doing, and we try to stay away from those kinds of decisions, those kinds of situations.
I do think about that, but at the same time, whether it's with Palworld, Sony, whoever, I think about that scene in Zombieland with Woody Harrelson, who's wiping his tears with piles of cash. And I'm like, yeah, probably that. It's like, how do you sleep at night? It's like, well, I mean, in a pile of money. Okay.
On a pile of money. It's very soft.
Which is to me, like, just the root of why I find it so frustrating is because, like, it is exactly that exchange. It's like the whole idea of like, well, I don't care because look how much money I got to make, right? I just find to be the grossest. Like,
it's your way of saying, like, I was right. Because what I did paid off, right?
For me,
which
look at all the money I got.
For me, yeah. Which of course ignores the wake of what you've left behind. All right, next question comes from Mimmabip Gourkee, who says, "What's your go-to instant snack for getting protein?"
Oh,
Aunt Ruby's peanuts is my go-to.
nice.
Very specifically.
Yeah, Adam's a Aunt Ruby.
Aunt Ruby
evangelist.
I think it was their dads that introduced us to them years ago.
There's just randomly like a tin of peanuts in the fridge, and I was like, "Why is there a tin of peanuts in the fridge?" And they were like, "They're like the best peanuts." Ate some, and I was like,
special
agreed.
peanuts.
And then they were. Yeah. So I spend way too much money on those things. Every few months I just buy I just order like 8 because that's to get shipped, So I just order like 8 tins. Each tin is like 12 ounces or something like that. So I just get this huge box of peanuts and cashews because their cashews are also really good. But then I just have it sitting on the counter. So anytime I'm just like, I just need some fat and protein just to like level out my blood sugar, just to like knock hunger back a little bit. Just go grab a handful. That's my go-to.
I actually just eat peanut butter straight out of the jar like a maniac. So it's
when I don't have
or with a
just with my face. I don't even use hands.
You just palm
lick it out.
Just lick it out. Go for it.
When I don't have Aunt Ruby's, then I have peanut butter instead.
Yeah, peanut butter's mine.
So just peanuts in some form or another.
Well,
you guys are the peanut
yogurt.
crew.
There's always yogurt in the fridge too. Just a big pile of that. Like,
Well, so I'm not gonna have a hard time answering this question because I don't know if mine qualifies as instant. But every week on Sunday, I basically spend an hour and a half chopping vegetables and making hummus.
And I think it's instant if when you go to eat it, it's ready to eat.
You just got it. Yeah. Which is why I've got all the prep. So I'll have basically 3 big Tupperwares full of like chopped red peppers, carrots, celery, cucumbers, tons of stuff. That are all chopped in a way to maximize hummus dipping ability.
Nice.
Okay. You can't just chop that shit arbitrarily.
No.
Yeah, it's got to be if you got a fat carrot, you got to chop it into chips for scooping, right? If you got a thin carrot, you got to chop it into long pieces for dipping. You know what I mean? It's all about the hummus delivery mechanism.
Yep.
And then I make probably a third of a gallon of hummus. I just got it in a big fat container, and then
every time I'm over at Seth's house, he pulls out the giant Tupperware.
He's like, "You guys want some hummus? Got some hummus."
There's just
yeah.
And the thing is, and it's just dripping on the inside, just hummus all the way down.
Yeah. So like I always did that to some degree, but over the past like couple of months, it's just turned into like a Sunday ritual. It's just like I just load up on my produce. I make my hummus and I'm just chopping. I'm just chopping and getting everything ready. And then just throughout the week, I'm just slamming hummus. Oh,
yeah. I do. I'm
So
doing it the non-cost effective way, which is that I always make sure I've stocked hummus that I've bought, which is
If you're
a
going
lot
through
more
like a
expensive.
gallon of it a week like Seth, it's
Yeah,
probably
I'm not going through that.
Well,
much,
the other
but still
thing is
fair
though,
amount.
like store-bought hummus, I found I don't like it. Like they got to add stuff to it to have it keep, you know? And
It's
so
all
I
very
just
different.
find
There's only like I kind of like all of it because I find all of it at least interesting if it's different, you know.
I just found it way too salty.
Yeah,
Like,
my
store-bought
wife has like
hummus-
just like one brand basically that I buy, and the rest it's like two something or other, you know. So yeah, being able to control exactly what's in there is good.
Yeah. It's
experience.
like, yeah, the store-bought stuff is super salty, and I feel like if I ate it at the volume that I eat hummus, my homemade hummus, I would probably just die of heart failure, I think, within a couple of months. That's way too much sodium. All right, next question comes from Mimmabip Gourkee, who says, the Crashlands 2 poster with the plateaus in the background is insanely good. Who drew it? Did you give much direction to what you wanted it to be like, or did you let the artist have free reign? So I think that's the first
one, yeah.
box art we had.
Yeah, so it was done by an artist named Philip Sue, you can find on Instagram. And essentially what I was looking for is like, because we didn't actually know anything yet. So this is always a problem with Crashlands originally. It's usually a problem with our games, which is that
Yeah, when did we commission this? It was like a year.
this is like a year ago. I think it's basically
plus.
before the launch.
It was
so
we had to do it before we did the coming
announcement.
soon page.
Yeah, which was in June. So yeah, I think it's basically a year and some change. And the problem was at that point we got like, you know, sort of like the major facts of stuff done, but we don't have the villain yet. I hadn't designed
We don't have all the art assets. We don't
Yeah.
have-
So there's like, you actually don't have a lot to work with, right? You oftentimes at the point where you still, though, need to make a public facing thing. So you have this really interesting challenge, which is then choosing how to represent the game in a way that is like conveys something about it that people might actually be able to get excited about. So I think what you'll find funny is that if you look at, it's what I would refer to as a genre piece, like purely, which is that this is the like standard open world crafty genre poster art where there's usually silhouette of a person, maybe two, who knows, up close, you know, in the foreground. And then it just kind of like looks cool back there. Is how I put it. Just looks cool.
Yeah.
sort
It
of
looks like a
environment.
place you want to go into.
Yeah. And if you look at, there's a game called Lightyear Frontier that came out recently, which is like basically like mech. You're in a mech, but it's like Stardew Valley sort of stuff.
Say no more. I'm in.
Yep.
Let's go.
And if you look at their box art, it's the same kind of approach, right? It's like, but the mech thing is kind of foregroundy, and then you're just looking off into cool vista. So I found this, I was looking for, that was like the only thing we could do meaningfully, because also I didn't know what to put. We didn't have stuff to put in. So luckily it happens to be the sort of thing that is relatively straightforward. You can actually like find people who just do really good, like big vista vibes, right? And just looked around a bunch and saw that Philip Sue guy's work in a couple different places. And if you look at his Instagram, you can see he's got just like every single one of his pieces has actually like a same kind of cool, huge, designy vista thing going on. Lots of color. And that was actually the hard part, was finding someone who could do like really ridiculous color work. Plus that, it's usually more toned down, a little more still epic feeling, but not quite as like fantasy or cartoony. So yeah, there's plenty of direction there. I was just kind of giving him a bunch of assets, telling him essentially what I wanted, pointing to a bunch of these vista shots. So I was referencing, they'd been like, I don't know, do it the way you would do it. He was like, all right, and then that was that. So
Yeah. So what I found pretty cool about it is it actually kind of follows the same trajectory we did in the first Crashlands, where we commissioned 3 pieces of box art for the first Crashlands throughout development. And the first one we got was, I think, like a year in to development, where we had gotten the savannah, or like some of the savannah, settled in terms of like, what's your starting workbench? What are some of the initial creatures and stuff? What does the first zone kind of look like?
who's the character?
And that was, who's the character? That's kind of all we knew, right? And so when we go to commission it, it's like, that's what we show. So it's, you see Flux standing there, you see the workbench, you see the saw, you see all the level
It's
1
stuff you
items.
get. Stuff you get in the first half hour of gameplay, right?
Yeah. Plus there's like a couple of like a Glidopus, and there's like a couple of like
Maybe a
slightly
Zug.
higher
We might have had
level
the
creatures.
creatures,
Yeah. I think we had like most of the stuff, at least in some stage, for the first zone, but we definitely had like the first couple of levels worth of things. And so that box art just shows that. But you'll notice that like there's no other real like characters or thing that implies a bigger story going on. But then if you look at the last box art we made or we had commissioned for
It's all
Crash, the
character
first Crash.
focused, right?
It's all character. It looks like a movie poster, right? Like Flux is there, and Juicebox. You got Hugo in the background. You got the quadrupus row in the front. You know, you got the
It's because
packages.
like we
you
actually
got
knew what the
everything,
fuck was
right?
happening at that point, and so we could do all that,
Yeah.
you know, put together.
Yeah.
But it is fun that it went from like environment to
Environment to story.
story,
right?
right? It was the,
Which is Crashes 2 is following the same trajectory, where the new box art is all about who as opposed to what, right? It's like Fluxes and Juicebox are front and center, standing on a package. You got like a creature egg in there, implying stuff about pets. You got your buddies. You got the villain in the background. We actually there's some renderings of some of the locations and like this big glowing tree. All these things are from the story of the game, right? And so we don't know any of that stuff until we're like on the tail end of production. And so that was the same struggle we had with the first Crashlands, was when we wanted box art to start promoting and talking about the game, but it's only like a third done.
Yeah, I think it's.
Then what do you put in the box art?
And it's always a funny thing because I think we had the same chat this time where it was like, can we even, you know, get a piece that will, like, if we can't figure out exactly what to put in there, like how do you get a piece that is in any way going to do the kind of work that we want to do? And I think it's the important note if you're trying to find box art for your game is that really all you're trying to do is signal a combination of things. One is polish and professionalism. So like, if the box art looks really good, it makes people more likely to just be like, this is probably good, right? Because people don't see your game to start with. They see the fucking box art on all these storefronts. So just that. So in other words, just is it high quality? And then two is, does it communicate like essentially the genre or the mood in a way that someone would be able to select it differentially from the other stuff in the store? So you'll see stuff that is like kind of more horror focused or whatever else. And you can tell, like if you look at those slugs, those box arts, it all looks, there's a certain thing going on in all of them. So you don't actually have to know a lot about specifically what's going on in your game. You just need to be able to communicate on this really high level. Again, kind of like the Palworld thing, Pokemon with guns. It's kind of like that where you got to communicate that piece of it. That's
vibes.
It's vibes. It's a vibe piece, which is actually way easier to do, way easier to think about than the more complicated, like, okay, very specifically, we have all these characters we need to kind of put together in this relationship. So it's always a fun challenge getting those early ones. They're a little tricky, but they're fun to kind of get arranged.
Yeah. And I always love the last box art that we always do for a given game, because it's always there's always so much stuff going on. And then like when you play the game, then if you go back and look at that poster or whatever, all the different characters make sense. And it's like a nostalgia moment thing. But as a developer, I also really love those first ones because it's a snapshot in time of like where we were at mentally in our understanding of the game at that time. And it's like a little time capsule, which is pretty, like I can appreciate both, you know, they're pretty cool. Next question comes from JohnFlavin, who says, Levelhead had a significant online component, what with the level creating and sharing and whatnot. Will there be any online components of Crashlands 2? For this discussion, let's say multiplayer is not included in the question. I don't remember if that's a thing you've announced is happening or whatever. I don't care because I don't play games with friends, so I'll put that topic to the side. Any non-multiplayer online components?
Not planned, aside from cloud saving stuff.
Cloud saving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Levelhead was our experiment to make what we call a hobby game, which is like a game that you could, if you wanted to, just play forever. And of course, the way to do that is user-generated content in some capacity. In the same way that, like, let's say you jumped onto Facebook in 2005, but the only stuff on Facebook is stuff that Facebook wrote. That's just a blog now, right? Right. What makes it have the staying power to last for 20 years and destroy democracy is that anybody can post on there, right? And that's why every time you pop in, it's fresh and there's something new. So, you know, when it comes to Levelhead, we were like, we can't make infinite levels, but our players can.
People can.
And so, yeah. And the amount of like social engineering we had to figure out how to do to make that not be a huge problem was vast. So much was about how do we design the game so that people don't exclusively build levels for maximizing exposure bucks or whatever, right? How do we keep people from putting horrible stuff in the titles of their levels? Or, you know, like there's a huge range of things that could happen that can degrade the quality of the experience because especially in a multiplayer context, players will do whatever they view as like the shortest path to getting some result without regard to how that's going to affect everybody else.
Tragedy of the commons is how it always works, basically.
Yeah. And so much of the time that we spent working on Levelhead was just trying to work around those kinds of problems, or to even design it so that if somebody did do this one thing that we think some people will do because they think there's some benefit, maybe there's like an achievement tied to it or something like that. If people engage with this thing in kind of a strange way, that how do we make it so that doesn't matter, that doesn't spill over and create bad experiences for other people. And then there's just problems of stability and cheating, where like from the stability side, whenever we update Levelhead, we got to update it
kind of everywhere
7
simultaneously.
times.
It's
7 times. Because it's on all these different stores, there's all these different versions, and it's online.
Yeah.
And so we have to
it's sort of
keep
like
everything
got our
synced
fill,
up.
I guess we got our fill a little bit with the Levelhead experience on like trying to do the lots of online stuff, at least for a time. And with how Crashlands is shaped, it didn't make any sense anyways. So we're like, okay, like the furthest we went was some of the early discussions were about like synced broader weather events and stuff like that. So like the world you were on was kind of, you could have these moments where like, oh, there's a herd of something coming through, but the game doesn't do any of that. It doesn't make any sense for that to even be a thing anymore. That was sort of like really high level. How could we do some kind of communal shared experience stuff? But I think with the shape of it.
Oh yeah. We were going to have like time would pass in the game whether you were in it or not.
Yeah, it was
there'd be stuff like, because we do in Crashlands too, we do have different moons that it's pretty subtle, but like they're on different cadences. So like there's a red moon that on the night of the red moon, certain things change about how like certain plants behave or things like that. And we were going to have it so that the day-night cycle was actually based on some like real world clock.
Yeah,
and
that was shared
so would
across.
the moons be. Yeah, so that way you would have like players would be like, oh, hey, there's going to be a red moon at 3 p.m. Central Time today, for 20 minutes. So if you're wanting to get this item that only drops during a red moon, like you got to play it at that time, which is kind of it's kind of cool, but it also
sucks.
It's very hard to reconcile that against like all the other things in the game, and it has a bunch of drawbacks and stuff.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of ideas for stuff like that, but none of them really.
It wasn't the core focus of the game. Does that make sense? So it's like a lot of the ones that are cool enough to warrant being like, ooh, we should explore that, are also intense enough that they don't really jive. You know what I mean? Like at the most basic level with just the design of the thing. So it was kind of we explored it a little bit and then just no thanks.
Now, there's one online component of Crashlands 2 that I do want to talk about a little bit, which is the community. Okay. So something that we have been talking about a lot in the design of Crashlands 2 compared to the first Crashlands is how much do we explain and how much do we reveal about things?
Information transparency as a design piece.
Yeah. So as a developer, you have to be really careful about what information you give to players and when, and how much you give and in what context. So in the case of like a tutorial or first starting to play the game, yeah, you could go ahead and explain everything right up front. You play a game like that where like you boot up the game and they're like, here's how you play. And then they just barf out like a huge encyclopedia entry on the screen. What's your first response? You just go, what the fuck? I'm not reading this. And you close out of this as fast as possible because there's a satisfaction you get as a player for tinkering with things and like using your brain and trying to figure stuff out, right?
Not even that. Even if you do, because I'm the kind of person who reads those carefully, but then you have to close it, and then you have to go play the game, right?
And you got to remember all the stuff,
and then you got to remember the stuff, and so because you're seeing it without the appropriate context.
Exactly, and so none of it really sticks or makes that much sense to you until you've got a reason for it to stick. And so what we try to do in our games is like present people with problems that they probably don't know how to solve yet, early game, and provide them with clues as to how they could figure it out on their own. And then there's a fallback where if the clues don't land and they still haven't gotten through that thing, then we have like an explicit thing that comes in and tells them about it. because it's kind of a progression to that. And so one of the things that we're always trying to be careful of is like the more we explain about everything, well, for starters, the less opportunities we give people to feel smart by figuring things out themselves. But also, if everything is 100% explained, like, oh, what's the drop rate of this item? Where does this thing come from? How does this, what are the exact steps I need to take to complete this quest or to get this item? With no ambiguity or experimentation or things that the player has to figure out, then they will never need to go into a community or ask or talk to another person who's also played the game and be like, oh, what did you do at this part, right? And because that's in a weird way, like withholding some information is a way to build communities.
It is, yes.
In your game.
You have to be really careful with it.
And you got to be careful.
Because most players of any given game will never interact with the community. Most of them, right? And so it has to be possible for most players most of the time to, it's like the needle that you're trying to thread is like, it needs to be possible for players, for any player, just to figure it out, right? But you also want to make room for people being able to share information with each other in such a way that, like, if a player didn't figure something out, right, but they get to go discover it via the community, then they were still able to play the game and have a good time. Mm-hmm. But maybe not be aware of a certain aspect of it or something like that, right?
Yeah. So a good example in Crashlands 2 is there are tons and tons of special items. A lot of them you just kind of get through the course of like the main storyline and through just your general crafting, whether it's like trinkets that do weird things or, gadgets that like you can go invisible with this one, or this one lets you like do some crazy fireball throwing shit or whatever, right? But not all of those items are a guaranteed thing for you to get on the main path. To get some of those things, you explore, right? Like the game will like point you to essentially. There's a lot of secrets, and any player will find all of them if they just explore, right? But not everybody's going to explore everything.
And like, even if you do, you might still not notice something in the corner of the screen, or
yeah. And so what we want for that is like the kind of community thing that we want to have is like, let's say you've been playing Crashlands 2 and like you're really interested in the poisoning equipment set. You're like, I want to make a poison build, right? And you're like partway through the game and you got a couple of items, and then you see some YouTube video that somebody's made, and they're like, oh yeah, like here's some tips on like how to maximize your poisoning shit or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they've got some item, and you're just like, what is that? I've never seen that before. And it turns out that you went right past that thing because there was like a road that just went off to the side and you just never explored over there. And there's like a whole ass quest chain over there that gives you that item. But because you kind of took a beeline through the zone and didn't take the time to look around, then you just missed it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the thing we want to have. It's not like, oh God, I'm stuck and I can't progress because I can't figure it out. It's more like, oh man, there's so much more stuff in this game than I realized because I just didn't go the same path that somebody else went, right? And that kind of thing. So that's when it comes to quote online stuff. That's what we've been talking a lot about internally is like trying to
not
make
actually
the game
as a part of the game, but considering the online communities,
online interactions around the game.
Yeah, as part of what we're thinking about as we design the content of it, which is like, I mean, there's a reality there, right? Which is this idea of like user-generated content and multiplayer, right? Mostly people talk about within the context of the game itself, right? But like you're saying, it's absolutely a thing that exists externally to your game, like user-generated content. All the videos people make about your game, right? All the stuff about it, all the interactions people have talking about it. And multiplayer, there's those same people talking about the game outside of it, right? And so you can still get a lot of those benefits, and the players can get a lot of those benefits in the context of a single player game if you're taking those things into account as part of the overall design.
Yeah. And like the gaming community that I've been interacting with the most this year is the Baldur's Gate community. Mm-hmm. It's a single, I mean, you can play multiplayer, but kind of. And so, but I also play WoW, and I don't really spend any time in the WoW community because if I want to interact with WoW players, I just log in to WoW. So, And like I've learned so many cool things from the Baldur's Gate community and found I've seen all kinds of weird like storylines or dialogue options or things that could happen that I've never seen. And I've got like 600 hours in that game or something. And there's still.
Yeah, my favorite posts in there are basically ones where people are like, I've played to my third playthrough and I just found X thing. And I'm like, I don't even know what they're talking about. Like, it's just, I also did not see that. And it's people who can play. The fact that you can basically play the game so much and that there's still the sense of discovery present is really impressive. You know, it's
dude,
awesome.
on my third playthrough, I'm trying to decide if this is spoiler. I don't think this is spoilers. It's like this weird, like dumb little side quest thing. There's this fucking genie.
Yeah.
Okay. And this genie has like a wheel that you spin the wheel to get prizes. If your character is perceptive, you realize that this genie is using Mage Hand, an invisible Mage Hand, to cheat the wheel and make it always land on bullshit. So you never get a good prize. On my third, so like my first couple playthroughs, I spun the wheel, didn't get anything. I was like, fuck it. On my third playthrough, I talked to the genie and I noticed that the genie has a trade button and you can offer to trade with the genie. And the genie only had one item, which was a ring that lets you cast Mage Hand. So I just bought the ring off the genie. This is probably a bug because most people pickpocket it. I just bought it and then I spun the wheel and I won something good. And the genie is like, what the fuck? You cheat. And basically, the genie accused me of cheating because nobody's supposed to win. Mm-hmm. And his Mage Hand stopped working or whatever. And he's banished me into a fucking portal by myself. My party members were left behind. And I got sent to some alternate dimension filled with dinosaurs.
These
and
don't
I
exist
had
anywhere else in the game, by the way. This is like... There's
this whole zone.
It's like the cow level and...
Basically.
Yeah. And I have to like sneak my way past all these fucking velociraptors and stuff. and then I find like off in some corner in this like jungle, a chest with like this insanely powerful trident in it that I looted. And then I found a portal to get back out of there. And I handed the trident to my fighter. And like, that's her weapon now because it's so fucking good. I didn't know that item existed. I didn't know that this jungle was there. I didn't know that this genie had this ring. Like none of these, the game doesn't point you to any of these things, right? And it's just those kinds of little
I think it's
layers of cool stuff.
Provide all these threads that players could pick up on and could pull on. But in the average play experience, like you're going to miss some. There's like no way that you're not.
You're going to miss almost all of them, really.
Yeah. And we try to do a lot of that similar stuff with the exploration things in Crashlands too, where it's you can just walk, you can just miss like a little path, and then kind of because the game's big enough, if you're looking at your map or whatever else, may not even notice that there's like an unexplored piece of something present. And
well, we actually in our playtest in back in like October, we had a player get to the last boss in the first act in like an hour and a half.
Insane. It was something. It was a couple hours. And it was like 2 or 3 hours. Maybe.
Yeah.
Because that playtest was the full first act versus the demo, which is like the first 2 hours of the first act.
Yeah. And so, but the thing is, if you do that, then you will still be wearing a level 1 dagger.
I can basically add boots and the dagger.
You had like one piece of armor and a dagger. So no real other weapons, no cool gadgets to use to fight with, no power-ups, no pet, just straight up, just like you naked with a dagger. And this player was like, this boss fight takes way too long. And we're like, yeah, man, like you're doing like an eighth of the amount of damage you could be doing because you skipped almost everything, right? And like people do this in Baldur's Gate as well, where they're like, they just breeze through the first act in a couple of hours, which most people say, yeah, it's like 15-ish hours of stuff to 20 hours of stuff in Act 1 if you explore and do it, right? But you can just do just the main quests and just like go straight through and be done with the first act in a couple of hours. But then everything is just kicking your ass because you haven't explored and gotten anything, and your characters are just super, super weak. And so it's weird because like all of that content together is optional, but you still got to do some of it, you still got to explore a bit and kind of get out into the world. And so, yeah, but we're trying to, we were inspired a lot by that kind of design, and we tried to incorporate more of that stuff into Crashlands 2 to make it so that that you can totally get through the game on your own. And you'll be
have enough
playing through
knowledge
the main
to
story.
Yeah.
You're not going to get stuck or whatever, but if you talk to other people who play the game, you will learn stuff that you missed, and you'll hear about things that sound crazy that you didn't even know about, right? So that's kind of the goal. And that's a good question. That's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, give Crashlands 2 a wish list, check out the demo. All that activity helps boost it up the Steam charts and will help the game have a successful launch when it comes out, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.